Alrighty, welcome into another Behind the Story. You're taking a look at video from another fascinating story. A great-grandmother has been wrongly branded as a felon for decades, 37 years to be exact, and her name is Phyllis Henderson. When speaking to KCTV5, she actually calls it a judicial disability. So right now we are joined by investigative reporter Angie Racono. Angie, thank you so much for joining me here at the live desk. Let's kind of start from the beginning. Introduce us to Phyllis. Who is she and how did she get in this position?
Sure. Okay, so Phyllis, I've actually interviewed before back in 2016 because we did a report on what it's like to be branded as a felon. She recently contacted me and said, "You're not going to believe this, but it turns out I don't have a felony." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" So she goes to get her record expunged, and it shows that this was actually a misdemeanor. This all goes back to 1988. A VCR was stolen, and Phyllis tells us that, she was there when other people were doing things, and she never snitched or revealed who took the VCR, but she didn't take the VCR. She gets kind of swept up in the mess. And she is charged with a felony, and then it is pled down to a misdemeanor because back then the value would have to be more than $150 to be a felony, and this was just a VCR, and even back then to use VCR, it's below that threshold. But somehow it gets entered into the system at the Missouri State Highway Patrol Records Repository as a felony. So her life goes on. And every time she's applying for a job, she's applying for housing, people run her name and it comes back that she is a felon. And her understanding, because obviously what happened in court wasn't clear enough to her, is she's like, okay, I guess it must have been a felony.
Right.
And this really haunts a person. There's a huge difference between having a felony on your record and having a misdemeanor.
Yeah, and I kind of want to break that down, the difference between how impactful a felony can be compared to a misdemeanor.
It's huge because a lot of places, especially until like just a few years ago, they wanted you to check the box, are you a felon? And sometimes, that would just be it. They just throw your, application in the trash. And it also really affects housing. And I don't know if people realize that because landlords can run a background check and decide they don't want to rent to you. Even though Phyllis is now, a senior citizen, it's something that still impacts her, which is why she went for the expungement, because this is always hung over her head. She would even get jobs and they would be, really good jobs. She was down in Arizona and she was transferring to Kansas City. She got a CDL, and that was something that she found was a good way to support herself. And then when she came here, they ran her name and they were like, no. Even within the same company, different rules in different states, they didn't want anybody with a felony. So she did a lot of temp work. It's just a much harder path
It's
if you
unfortunate
have a felony.
for sure. Yeah.
Yes.
And I know she tried to push back. She tried to defend her name and even asked for a pardon from the governor at the time, Jay Nixon.
From Jay Nixon.
And what was
she
his
showed
response?
me her paperwork. No. So it's just been a really difficult path for her. And she did, when it came back as a felony, this is probably like 1990. She goes down to the police department. She's like, what is this? What do you mean it's a felony? And they run her name and they're like, here you go, right here in black and white, you have a felony. So she went through UMKC's expungement clinic, and I spoke with the attorney, Ellen Sooney, who's there, and she said, you do see mistakes in paperwork, but she's never seen anything this big. Sometimes somebody will have something on their record, but they write down the wrong statute, theft versus robbery, something small, but nothing that is as big of a deal as this. Of course, if something like this would happen now, you could easily just pull it up on CaseNet, you could check court records, and you could solve it. But the only way they could find the information was digging through old paper files in the courthouse.
Yeah, and I think that's really what spoke out to me in your story, is that UMKC, they were surprised by this. Just, they had never, like you said, never seen anything like this before, but what a relief it is for Phyllis to now have this victory. What did she say to you as far as her reaction now?
She's happy about it, but she said, this has been slapping me in the face for 37 years. It really changed the trajectory of her life. What was a simple, probably clerical error on someone's part really impacted her. And when these things happen, a lot of times different people don't have, what I'm saying, like access to lawyers and all of these people, to fight back. I mean, it's really changed her life. She's a wonderful woman. She's a great grandmother, but she's really dealt with a lot because of this.
And it's just unfortunate, like I said before. And I do want to touch on something really fast
Sure.
that you also mentioned in your story, is that it's easier to get an expungement in the state of Kansas
It
than
is.
Missouri.
You know, it's different in all the states how they do that.
Yeah.
And the way Ellen Sunni explained it, she says, you know, Missouri's kind of in the middle. It's difficult to get an expungement, but we're kind of in the middle. And in Kansas, it's easier because a lot of times people make mistakes, things happen. And then you go on and, you know, life moves on and you move on and you're not that mistake from, you know, 1988.
Right.
And so Kansas just has a little bit different of an attitude, and it's a little bit easier to do that there. A lot of people do want expungements, but it's hard.
Right.
And for Phyllis, you know, she was really thankful that UMKC has this expungement clinic that helps people, because you have to, you know, bring all of this stuff to a courtroom. And, you know, in her case, it was interesting reading what her attorneys presented, because they're having to explain to the judge, we want you to expunge this, but guess what? It's not really a felony. It's written as a felony, but it's really this misdemeanor. Here's all the old court records. And of course, they're all written in cursive.
Yeah.
But they tracked down all the old records, and right there, that's her old mugshot from 1988.
I was going to draw attention to that as well, just looking at how young she is in this photo, how many years this goes back, and then to look at her now and the story that's now posted on our website. This woman has been through so much, just from something that happened years ago. What is her message to the community, Angie, and to our viewers? What does she want them to take away from the story?
She was like, you know, I think she's a little mistrustful of the judicial system now, to be honest, after what has happened to her. And she questions if there are other people out there like her. She's like, if this happened to me, did it happen to someone else? So I think she kind of wants to step forward to, in a way, clear her name to everyone around her, like, hey, guess what? I am not a felony. And it is such a bizarre story that she wanted to share. And like I said, you know, I knew her years ago. We did a report, and so she reached out to me about it. But I think she's curious if maybe there's anyone else out there who's like, hey, I went to court and this was my understanding, and now the computer records tell a different story. So maybe she's not the only one.
Right. It does make you wonder who else is out there that, you know, hasn't spoken up here publicly.
Yeah.
Angie, where can we catch your story and learn more about Phyllis's story?
So Thursday at 10 p.m., but it's also online right now. You can watch it, you can read it. And there's Phyllis. I mean, she's just wonderful. She's such a neat person, and she's so much different than that wild night in 1988. And she talks about it in our story. You know, she collects Bibles. That's one of the things about her, you know, great-grandmother, just a very different person than that. And life should have probably taken a little bit different of a turn for her.
Right. And you can definitely feel her personality and just how genuine she is in your interview with her. So I definitely encourage our viewers to go out and check it out. It is on our website right now. That's where we're taking a look right now, kctv5.com. Angie, I want to thank you so much for joining me here at the Live Desk for Behind the Story, and we'll be sure to have you on. I believe we'll be talking again this week to talk about another investigative story.
We will. Thank you, Janae.